Hello, welcome to Postcolonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and as you can see, I'm experimenting with my new setup at my new apartment. So I thought I've been quiet for a few days, and I've had some responses to my previous video that I posted a few days ago on the topic of essentialism and why to avoid it and binarism in postcolonial studies. And someone had aptly commented on that video that these two concepts, binarism and essentialism, are also connected to generalization, right? And that's another thing to keep in mind and I also always teach my students that we should not generalize uncritically in any kind of postcolonial work. So what do I mean by generalizations? Generalizations in theory or in practice are when we associate certain tropes to one group, or when we make a monolithic group and then assign qualities to them. So roughly speaking, the kind of work that is being done in postcolonial studies in the former colonies, sometimes people employ generalizations like East and West. So in both the cases, then they assume a stable monolithic identity of the East and a stable monolithic identity of the West. And the problem in that kind of an argument is that you are dealing with two essentialized, larger than life monolithic concepts. And your argument is based in those assumptions. And it's pretty much then the same way of arguing as the colonizers themselves did, right? They would make natives into these monolithic groups, assign them immutable, unchanging qualities, and then judge them accordingly. And the reason I encourage my students not to do that is on different levels. One, on a philosophical level. If we are really going to do good scholarship, it has to be precise, it has to be subtle to differences, and it has to be attentive to particularities of any one situation that you're trying to analyze. And there is a reason for that, because if you are particular and careful with your subject matter, then you are going to become a more nuanced and compassionate scholar. Then instead of making these large claims, America is this, and Russia is this, and India is this, you will create space for yourself through your degree of specificity for critiquing whatever you don't agree with or whatever you think are the imperial policies of these nations, but give you room to also acknowledge some human decency, some work being done by activist politicians over here, which is counter to the hegemonic project of America or hegemonic project of India or Pakistan. So on a philosophical note, then your argument would be more nuanced and attentive to detail, right? On a pragmatic level, as you send out a paper to publish or a book to be reviewed for publication, if you have mobilized large, unreflected generalizations, any reviewer worth his or her name, it doesn't matter where they are from, if they know the subject matter and they are reviewing your manuscript, they would very clearly, outrightly state in their review that this essay or this book relies too heavily on uncritical assumptions, on vast generalizations, right? And pragmatically, then it is likely that essay will not be published, or you'll be required to revise it so that you deal with particular subjects. So on a philosophical level, generalizations are not good because they take away the acuteness and the awareness of working with details and pointing out, flaws in an argument, but by carefully reading it and pointing out the particularities of it. And it enables you to be less essentialist, right, and more nuanced and constructivist in your approach, how things come to be. because that leaves you the chance of imagining change. Because if you have essentialized something, then it is ossified, then it is immutable, unchangeable, right? So that's the philosophical level. But pragmatically speaking, if you're writing a thesis, if you're writing a paper, anytime you mobilize a generalization about a people, about an author, about a group of scholars, you are opening yourself to an immediate challenge and critique of having overgeneralized. Now that leads me to this question of sometimes we do have to use terms that are general, that generalized large groups, right? For example, in my forthcoming book, I am doing a comparison, right, of the Muslim reader or the reading practices of the Muslim world in opposition to the reading practices developed in the metropolitan West. But what I've done in that is that every single time, or at least when I invoke those generalizations, I put it within the body of my discussion that I'm aware that I'm generalizing here. And then in a footnote, I give a reason as to why am I generalizing here. So letting your reader know that you are aware that here at this instance you're making use of a generalization is also a good strategy, because then at least they know that you might have a strategic reason for generalizing over here, but you are aware that there is a slippage in that generalization, and that maybe thought carefully the generalization itself could be further nuanced and honed. So that I have found to be a really good strategy, because if you're dealing with large systems, they come across as monolithic. So as a scholar, as a writer, then you have to make room and let your readers know that you are generalizing and that there is a strategic purpose to it. Now, another thing to keep in mind about generalizations is also that most of the time, uncritical generalizations are essential and sometimes also racialized, or they work with gender stereotypes or regional stereotypes. These were all the tools that the colonizers used. These are all the tools that the dominant groups used. These are all the tools that the racists used to define various ethnicities. These are all the tools that sexist men use to define women, right? Women are like this, women are like that. So anytime someone mobilizes a generalization, in my opinion, it is always geared towards maintaining the status quo of the dominant group. And it enables them to then label people under large generalizations and then assign them a role in the world or in the society. Our job as postcolonialist scholars, right, is to point to those generalizations, to dismantle them, right? So how do we do that? Sometimes, you might have read an article, people would go out, like if they are talking about Islam or political Islam, right? When someone makes a large claim about this is how Muslims are, our challenge is always to particularize. So which Muslims are you talking about? Sunnis, Shias, within Sunnis, which group? Not all Muslims are terrorists, right? That is a particularity moved against a generalization, right? But it applies to you as well. If you're sitting in Pakistan, sitting in India, our politicians and scholars even are very free with their generalization. America is doing this, America is doing that, right? And that's a very easy argument to deflate. Because which America are you talking about? Are you talking about Donald Trump? Are you talking about the economic system that America supports, capitalism, neoliberalism? And if you're not particular enough, then your argument comes across as this huge generalization that you're working with. So critique of power, America or anyone else or any other institution or nation will be more effective if instead of mobilizing a large generalization, you went for the specific. If you want to criticize America, you can go ahead and say, here is the dilemma of American foreign policy. On one hand, they want democracy. On the other hand, they deny the same rights to Palestinians, right? Pointing out those subtle, focused inconsistencies in the policies of powerful nations or powerful constituencies are more effective than mobilizing huge generalizations and building an argument on that. So, as I said, this was prompted by a request and a suggestion by one of the viewers who had watched the video on avoiding essentialism and binary way of looking at the world in postcolonial studies. And rightly so, I think I agree that along with that, we also ought to avoid large generalizations, whether it be opinions about authors, opinions about texts, books, or larger entities, powerful countries, or former colonizers. We ought to leave ourselves enough room to be particular and to pinpoint as to why we are opposed to a certain thing or a certain practice or a certain historical fact, right? Then our argument will be more effective, it will be more precise, but I think it will also be more impactful. There is one way of saying America is bad. How many Americans are going to like that? But if we argue that America itself stands for something larger, something noble, but within that, here are the inconsistencies when American politicians do that, when American government does that, then you're creating room within that discourse for people who might be American, but who will read your point of view and read it from your point of view, and maybe will work in solidarity with you to change things. You can apply it to any situation in India or Pakistan. Any blanket generalization often is less effective, can be dismantled very easily, and cannot have much of an impact unless you are talking to a captive constituency who are already on your side. Then you can mobilize all the generalizations that you want. So these are some of my ideas about why not to generalize in your scholarship, in your teaching, and even in your modes of thinking about the world and about politics or about culture and literature, especially in postcolonial studies. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have, and any suggestions that you might have, please put them in the comments. I always love to read your comments, and I respond to them, pretty much every single comment. And I'm also grateful to you that you take the time to watch these videos and share them with others, because that gives me a lot of solace in these hard times, and it is also a recognition of my work. So I'm really grateful to you all for that. I hope you all are doing well. I hope you're taking care of each other and taking care of yourself. Remember, the pandemic is not yet over. We are still fighting through it, struggling through it, and I hope that you stay healthy and safe. I will now see you next time on some other topic. Until then, take care, and as always, peace and love.